What's up going on, everybody? It's your boy Hermitage Saberufuro, and welcome back to Lyoko book reading with book 2. And I'm sorry it has been like so long, weeks since I've done this, but I was busy with all the YouTube drama and game drama and everything and I could not be more sorry than I ever was for not getting to this sooner, providing you all with content. But here I am now. Let's get right into the next chapters, and let's see where this will take us. Enjoy, people.
Seven. The interrogation. The monitor of Jeremy's laptop suddenly began to flash. Alarm. Intruder alert. Shush guys. Jeremy hissed, while his fingers began to dance over the keyboard. This might be it. Elida extinguished the TV and Ulrich kicked away the now empty pizza boxes. The children pressed around the computer, which now displayed the image of a lanky figure wrapped in a long grey greatcoat, of those most often seen worn by spies and criminals in film noir. Ha ha! Jeremy exclaimed in triumph. He came in through the front gate, as I predicted. But there are no dogs with him. And it was definitely dogs that attacked Kiwi. Yumi reminded him, perplexed. Jeremy shrugged. He could have left them behind. They were not with him yesterday evening after all. In any case, we'll soon be able to question him in person. He increased the micro camera's zoom and the intruder's face filled the monitor, the boy with the copper-colored hair. His half-closed eyes were underscored with two dark bags. In the gloom of the garden, he looked like a very ill person. Seeing that face, Elida again began to feel faint. She knew this boy, even if she could not remember where from or who he was. What next, Jeremy? Asked Ulrich, interrupting her deliberations. We get ready. Once he's in position, I'll spring the trap. Ulrich sprinted into the kitchen, where they had left a big box containing materials for the coming interrogation. He lifted it with no effort and carried it into the living room, and then began to distribute its contents between his friends. Come on. Jeremy grunted. Why is he just standing there? Why isn't he approaching the porch or the garage? I could go out there, Ulrich proposed, and lure him towards the trap. That's too dangerous. Yumi cut him off. For all we know, he might be armed. Jeremy calmed them down. It's all right, he's moving again. One step forward. Then another. The boy on the monitor seemed undecided. He advanced towards the porch as if to sound the bell, then he turned back and went to his left, towards the garage, walking hesitantly on the frozen snow. Jeremy switched to the feed from another camera, mounted over the trap. Once the boy passed underneath, snap. He had deliberately prepared things so that he could relocate the trap based on the information from the cameras. Just a few more steps. On the monitor, a wireframe grid overlaid the image of the boy. A rangefinder. The intruder's open eyes shone in the dark. Everyone held their breath. Jeremy's finger moved onto the computer's execute key. Time seemed to slow down, even the leaves on the trees ceasing their movement as the boy on screen walked cautiously towards the garage wall. Jeremy bit his lower lip and stabbed the key with his finger. The trap was sprung. In his room, Odd paused the image on screen and scrolled back several frames. Yes, there was something there. Jeremy and Ulrich had been chatting the whole night, perhaps their attention had drifted and they had never noticed. He grabbed his phone and tried to call Jeremy. User unavailable. He tried Ulrich's number. The same result. A cold trickle of anguished fear squeezed through his t-shirt collar and slid down the length of his back. He jumped to his feet and from under the bed dragged a big cardboard box that contained a laptop computer. It had been a gift from his parents and Jeremy had over several hours installed every program and application in the known universe onto it, but Odd had only used it once or twice to listen to some MP3 files. He was not a great fan of technology. He waited impatiently as the gizmo fired up. Did it always take an eternity for this thing to boot itself? Then he inserted the DVD and opened a video editing suite. What was it Eva had told him about image enhancement? Contrast, brightness, and curves. He bungled about a bit with the software once he found the function that she had been describing. It was a kind of graphic that represented a quarter of a circle. Odd found that he could drag the curve around with the mouse, deforming it and changing, well, he did not quite know what. Sometimes the image became crisper after fading to darkness, the colors going mad. But it was the only function he had any clue on how to use. He started working with feverish concentration, his eyes focused on a single frame from the DVD, and at an exact point, between the trees, where the pixels of the image had become jumbled and confused. As if something had been hidden. Crap, he hissed in a low voice. He had exaggerated the curve until the image became an incomprehensible mess of hodgepodge colors. He undid the action and started again. There. The image of a man, with broad shoulders, a thin waist and imposing musculature. At his feet was something indistinct and hard to make out. Odd saved a copy of the image, then extracted several more frames from the DVD and repeated the procedure. In the next image the man had turned into profile and the silhouette of a big rucksack could be glimpsed on his back. And standing as high as the level of his waist were. What the heck is that? Odd cried. Ponies? Calves? Neither one nor the other, obviously. They were dogs. Two big dogs with an aggressive attitude, unleashed, and smelling the ground at the man's feet. Two thoughts flickered through Odd's head in rapid succession. First, this man had two dogs and Kiwi had been attacked by two such dogs. So it followed that the boy Jeremy and the others were waiting to capture at the Hermitage was innocent and they were going after the wrong person. Secondly, the man with the dogs had managed to mask himself from the video feed before it had been burnt to disk. That meant he had equipment sophisticated enough to tamper with Jeremy's surveillance system. Then he was a very dangerous man indeed. And, worst of all, his friends had no idea he even existed. Without even bothering to switch the computer off, Odd jumped to his feet, seized his jacket and phone and sprinted out of the room. The entire world, and not just the garden, seemed to have drowned in snow. Professor Hopper might have bothered to shovel the snow away, Richard Dupuis protested to himself. He leaned against a tree and stood on one foot, recovering a sodden woolen sock that had slipped into the bottom of his boot and which was causing him grief. Recomposed, the young man checked around himself, worried. He had come back. For the second time in 2 days he had secretly entered the garden of the Hermitage. This was the stuff of madmen. When all he had to do was ring the doorbell, adopt as casual an attitude as possible under the circumstances, and say, "Hello Professor. It's me, Richard Dupuis." He imagined his old teacher, that serious face under the dark beard, the bright lensed glasses that hid the eyes from view. "Don't you remember me? I came because..." No, that did not compute. He could not face the professor so directly. And was Hopper even still living here? Richard could remember the newspaper headlines from so many years ago, mysterious disappearance of Catholic educator and only child. But no, he had to assume they had returned. Why else would? Concentrating on his memories, Richard approached the garage. It was his intention to circle the house from the outside and judge if there were any lights on. And then, if he found anything, he would have summoned his courage to ring the doorbell. Suddenly he heard a blast, a concentrated jet of air that disturbed the hairs on his head. And then there was a click or, more accurately, a retort. What happened next was very confused. Something struck him in the back and knocked him off his feet into the snow. Frightened, he tried to recover his footing, but found himself becoming entangled in a kind of metal net. He mustered the strength to get his feet under him and tried to straighten up, but the net writhed like a metal snake and dragged him back down. And then Richard was struck by an electrical discharge and lost consciousness. When he reopened his eyes, for a moment he thought he had been drugged. Or that he had gone mad, or both of the two together. He was still bound in the metal net, but instead of out in the garden he was now in a dark room with a cement floor. The only illumination came from a blade of light that emerged from under the bottom of a door. Several large boxes stacked against a wall hinted at a house moving that had never been completed. Now that Richard's eyes were little by little adjusting to the darkness, he could see 4 figures seated in a semicircle a few paces in front of him. They seemed extremely short. Perhaps they were dwarfs, and were shrouded by the darkness. Their faces were completely invisible. Richard shook his head. What was this? A dream? A nightmare? A surreal film in which nothing can be understood? What is your name? Demanded the figure seated furthest to the left. It had a very intimidating voice, deep and reverberating. Richard. Richard Dupuis, he stuttered. Why were you in the garden? The voice continued. Richard remained silent for a short while. He could lie, but what would he gain from it? Better to tell the truth. He had nothing to hide. I was looking for Professor Hopper, he answered. It's a strange way to be looking for someone. All I know is that the professor lived here before he disappeared over 10 years ago. You knew Hopper? Another voice inquired. It seemed to be that of a television actor whose name Richard could not recall. The young man nodded, blinking to try and clear his vision and get a clearer view of the figures that surrounded him. Yes. But years ago. Before he disappeared, I was a pupil of his at Caddick Academy. And I was in the same class as his daughter, Elida. One of the dark figures started. Richard's chin itched. This was an absurd situation, and a little frightening. But these strange people did not seem particularly threatening. He continued, I was hoping to see Elida, if only because she might have been able to explain to me why, well, I can't show you why, bound up like this. The strange person in front of him fiddled with something. The mesh of the net in which he was imprisoned loosened, allowing him to move. Groping blindly, Richard searched inside his greatcoat and withdrew a Palm Pilot computer with a tiny monitor little bigger than a playing card. It lit up instantaneously and on screen appeared a scramble of letters and numbers, which gradually occupied every piece of free space. After a few seconds the display went blank and then the letters and numbers began to fill up again. This started 10 days ago, Richard explained. At first I thought it had picked up a virus, but then I realized that it was Professor Hopper's doing. Or, at least, I hope it is. Why Hopper? The voice replied. Richard jutted out his hand, holding the Palm computer forward. The series of letters and numbers seemed to be in an incomprehensible code, apart from the first 6 letters of each line, which spelt out in capitals, Elida. The corridor shone with white pools of neon light. Odd covered it, constantly checking over his shoulder while trying again to dial the numbers of his friends, Ulrich, Yumi, Elida, and Jeremy. All of their phones were switched off. He had to reach them as soon as possible. And where do you think you're going? Said Jim, rising up from behind a column. Sorry Jimbo, no time to stop, he answered, trying to gain headway towards the door. He suddenly realized that, even though his limbs were still in motion, he was no longer moving towards the door. Jim had picked him up from behind. No time for what? Must I remind you that you're under curfew? Holding him up high like a puppet, Jim turned Odd around between his hands so as to look him in the face. Well, in the heat of the moment, Odd thought. He could not tell Jim that his friends were at the Hermitage. They were risking expulsion after having left the dormitories in the middle of the night. But in any case, he had to do something. Okay, but only if you put me down. As soon as his feet touched the ground, Odd took off again. While running he seized his phone and punched in the numbers that had been inscribed with rounded handwriting on his hand, Eva Skinner's. Hello, Eva, it's Odd. Yeah, sorry, but I need a favor. Do you know the Hermitage? It's behind Caddick, an old house on Ruta, hold on. Odd turned. Jim was right on his tail. He hurled himself down the stairs towards the girls' accommodations. Anyway, I've got no time to explain everything. Just sound the bell, 3 short trills and 1 long one. 3 short, 1 long. You have to tell them that the red-headed boy is not the person we're looking for. There's another man. Thin but muscular, with 2 dogs. If they check the video footage again they'll find him. Eva quickly repeated the instructions back to him through the phone's speaker. Despite the late hour, she did not sound sleepy in the slightest. Perfect, Odd confirmed. Like I said, this is really important. Thank you. Then he veered to the left and slid into the first door that presented itself to him. It was Sissy Delmas's bedroom. The girl's howls when first Odd and then Jim appeared at the foot of her bed woke up all of Caddick. They had left Richard in the garage and relocated to the kitchen to discuss what was to be done. A quick search on Jeremy's computer had confirmed for themselves that yes, there had been a Caddick student named Richard Dupuis in the same class as Elida Hopper. You don't remember him yet, honestly? No, even though yes, his face was familiar. But anyway, we have to let him go, right? He's not done anything remotely evil. Jeremy did not seem wholly convinced. I felt that I knew him from somewhere, she continued. And that's why, he was my classmate. And now he's 10 years older than me. Yeah, it's strange alright, Ulrich admitted. The fact that you never aged in Lyoko has made a beautiful mess of things. Jeremy took from the table one of the vocal manipulators he had built himself. It resembled a little ball of dark plastic tied to a ribbon. He arranged it around his throat, just under his chin, and then exclaimed, with the profound voice, "No. I'm not convinced. We'll continue with the interrogation." "Okay," agreed Elida, with her own vocal unit in hand. "Hey," protested Ulrich. "I don't want to have to use that gizmo again." "Oh, stop your whining," Yumi said quietly. He held out his apparatus to her with a hopeful smile. Jeremy lay down at Richard's feet, still hidden in the darkness, and seized the palm computer. Richard jerked in fear, but the younger boy ignored it. On the small monitor the tens of lines of code were still scrolling, each preceded by the word Elida. Jeremy attentively studied the coding, and it did not take him long to recognize it. All of it was written in Hopix, the programming language devised by Hopper, the grammar that allowed Lyoko to exist and take form. "Okay," he at last concluded. "I don't know what this stuff means, but I'm sure that it was written by Professor Hopper." And at that moment the sound of the doorbell echoed within the garage's rough walls. Shrin, shrin, drin, driainen. 3 short, 1 long. "It's the signal," Yumi whispered. "Eli, a female voice cried from outside the garage door. "It's me, Eva Skinner. Odd sent me and he says it's important. Can you hear me? Are you in there?" Richard wriggled beneath the net and tried to stretch his hands out into the darkness. "Elida. Is Elida here?" He turned his head in Jeremy's direction. "You're not her, are you?" The boy turned back towards his friends, unsure of what to do. Then behind him, Elida strode to the garage door and flicked the light switch. The naked bulb hanging from the ceiling dazzled them for an instant. When Richard saw the girl with the fiery red hair his face turned as white as a sheet. "You're, oh my. But you're," then his eyes rolled back in his skull and he collapsed onto the floor. "Did he just faint?" Ulrich asked, having thrown away his vocal manipulator. "Oh, I don't know," Jeremy answered sarcastically. "You come looking for your classmate Elida, expecting her to be 23 years old, like yourself, and find she's still 13.
And in the middle, we have the very interesting pages in the middle of the book, which seems to be evidence, like some kind of court case. Oh yeah, they're different each page. So this page, there's like more stuff being piled here. More and more stuff. Wow. Very high intensity love. I mean, potentiometer. Memory record or suppress. Danger. Dangerous looking love. Anyway, let's continue.
Ate the man at the door, "How did you know that we were here?" Jeremy's voice was cold and threatening, but Eva seemed nonplussed. In fact, she smiled. "I already told you. Odd called me. He said that the red-headed boy, which I guess means him, she indicated towards Richard, is not the one you're looking for. There was someone else, who had been masked from the video. What video? He replied in a tone of inquiry. The surveillance videos of the Hermitage, Eva replied with a grin. If you'll let me see them, I can show you the exact frame in just a few seconds. Jeremy straightened up. Informatics was his field of expertise and he would not admit that he needed any help. He returned moments later with the already booted laptop and set to work. After half an hour's work he had located the incriminating frame and produced a clear, enlarged image. A man, 2 dogs. This is insane. And you never noticed him before now, Ulrich exclaimed. Jeremy lowered his gaze, resentful. Only because the feed had been tampered with. You mean that someone modified them to hide this second person carrying a rucksack? They must have had something that enabled them to digitally remove him in real time. Incredibly advanced technology. They all stood in silence for a moment, perplexed. Now they had at least 2 mysterious individuals to deal with. Richard, who in the meantime had regained consciousness, was certainly harmless. From his corner he had done nothing except stare, eyes wide open, at Elida. The man with the 2 dogs, however, was almost certainly dangerous. Eva smiled again, and Yumi observed her with a frown. This girl seemed to be able to do nothing except smile, and always in the exact same way. Are you telling me that this is what you guys get up to at night? Eva inquired. All these equipment, computers, booby traps, where did you get all this stuff? Ulrich moved to speak, but Jeremy stopped him with a jab of the elbow and answered in his place. They were purchased by me from a security system store. And why? The girl pressed on. It was clear that they could not tell her about Lyoko and the supercomputer. But before they come up with a cover story, Richard preempted them. I came here because I went to school with Elida. More than 10 years ago now. But then codes began appearing on my Palm computer, and they kept repeating the word Elida, and I remembered my old classmate, who should have been 23 years old, but instead was 13, and then, they all burst out laughing. Richard's explanation was so disjointed as to sound fantastic. Eva laughed as well, commenting sardonically that the others clearly had some secret they were withholding. It would be dangerous for us to tell you anything more, Jeremy explained. The situation is complicated enough as it is. But you haven't told us anything to begin with. Richard retorted. Elida is, I'm ill, she replied, hurriedly inventing a story. I have a rare condition that stunts my growth. And now she attends school with us, and nobody remembers her from before, Yumi added. Which is why it's a secret, you understand. Richard, however, did not understand and continued to shake his head. He went on to declare that he would not be leaving the city until he had a proper explanation of the situation. Another time, Jeremy cut him short. It's really late and we have to return quickly to Kadak if we don't want to be discovered. All right. I'm staying at the Hotel de la Gare, next to the train station. I'll leave you my phone number for now. But, if I don't hear from you, I will come looking for you, he concluded darkly. The children nodded. Eva and Yumi left the house by the front driveway, in order to head back to their respective homes. The other children instead went around to the villa's rear face, crossing directly in the grounds of Kadak Academy. Only a short walk now lay between them and the school buildings. Total silence reigned, the moonlight reflecting on the snow-covered pine trees. Puffs of the 3 children's breath steamed in the cold evening. Some evening, yeah. Ulrich murmured eventually. Yeah. Richard, my old classmate. It must have been a shock for him to see me like this. And let's not forget the mysterious man and the sudden arrival of Eva Skinner, Jeremy added. I have the horrible suspicion that things are only going to get more and more complicated. The truth was that Hopper seemed to have left behind him a thick web of unsolved mysteries. For example, everything relating to Lyoko and Xana. Who had been pursuing him when he took refuge in Lyoko with Elida? And what was the ultimate fate of her mother? The girl furtively slipped a hand under her sweater to grasp her father's love trinket, Waldo and Anthea. Jeremy began to reflect in a thoughtful tone. In the video from the secret room, Hopper was talking about this secret Project Carthage. Now, it is probable that they were affiliated with the government, who don't usually turn bloodthirsty dogs loose. Which means, asked Ulrich. It means that this may be a government agency that has little respect for the rules, or that there's another party playing this game, he answered with a sigh. But who? asked Elida. Jeremy checked around them, and then whispered, "Someone who has money, technology, and is ready to do anything necessary. We've got to keep on our guard." Ulrich yawned. "What are you proposing, Jeremy?" The juvenile genius wanted to wait and continue studying the video footage of the Hermitage, in hopes of discovering something else. But they were all beginning to feel a little worried. Ulrich strove to smile. "Well, we can relax a bit for now. We're back at the school, there's the door to the dormitories, and we're going to have to split up for now to avoid Jim." "Just one thing," Jeremy added. "Elida, please. No nightmares tonight." "I'll try." She was on Lyoko. The landscape extending around her was flat, an expanse of sand broken here and there by oblong rocks that cast no shadows. The sky was a uniform dark blue from horizon to horizon. Elida had a sense of vertigo, as if her eyes were unable to correctly process what she was seeing. This was how it felt when Jeremy brought her into Lyoko to terminate one of X.A.N.A.'s attacks. But XANA is dead. Daddy sacrificed himself to kill it. And the supercomputer has been shut down. This is just another dream, Elida. She had assumed the appearance of an elf, with finely pointed ears and vivid fuchsia hair, wearing a light dress that ended in a pink mini-skirt, and underneath, leggings and soft boots. She didn't need a mirror to know that on her face 2 stripes of red makeup had appeared, starting underneath her eyes. They cut diagonally across her cheeks to end at the corners of her mouth. It's only a dream. The sudden barking of dogs made her start with shock. They were nearby, and coming nearer with every second. She began to run, making her escape over the sandy surface. From all the time she had spent on Lyoko, she knew things were not as they seemed, and what looked to be soft sand was in fact a hard and compacted layer into which it was impossible to sink. The growling dogs were gaining on her. With her heart in her throat, Elida kept on running, only now the hiss and zap of laser rays had joined the ferocious barking. This was meant to be their sanctuary, but now there was no shelter to be had. This way. The sphere appeared suddenly, a ball of light little bigger than her head, hanging in the air. Inside currents of liquid light swirled, white, azure and ruby red. And that voice, she could never have possibly confused it with any other. It was her father. "My dear, quickly, follow me. We don't have much time." The sphere took off and Elida followed it, while her invisible pursuers came near and nearer. She had never seen them, never turned back to look at them, but it didn't matter, she knew they were there. The sphere dropped to skim along the ground, which suddenly opened into a chasm. "Elida, jump in. We're almost there." Leaping through, Elida transitioned from the desert to a vast glacial plain. The difference was so staggering as to take the breath away. Now in place of the fake sand there was just smooth whiteness, ice that held no reflections, under a dark and naked sky. No reference points, nothingness on nothingness all the way to the horizon. "We have to find somewhere to hide," Elida cried. "Don't be afraid, they cannot find us here. Not for a little while, at least." "Elida, there is something important I must tell you. The secret room, where you found the video I left for you." Elida stopped listening. A soft, subdued growling was coming from behind her. The dogs had found them here. She screamed. She awoke with a start, drenched in sweat, then looked around and shrieked again. She was no longer in her room in the dormitories, but in the sewers. She lay in a flow of black water from which an unbearable stench arose, and her whole nightgown was soaked with sewage. "Disgusting," she exclaimed, rising to her feet. What could have happened? She had said goodnight to Jeremy and Ulrich and went to sleep in her bed, just like normal. She had to have risen while dreaming, and left the dormitories. Somnambulism, she had been sleepwalking. Elida remained immobile for some time, the soiled nightgown clinging to her while she stared into the deep, heavy darkness of the sewers. She knew this place. It was the secret passage that led from Kadak Academy to the grounds of the Hermitage, her father's villa. Marguerite entered into the study and her husband, Robert Della Robbia, lifted his gaze from the display of his laptop computer. "Something wrong, sweetie?" His wife's eyes were tired and her delicate mouth was drawn into a wan smile he knew only too well. "Something's troubling you." She approached and distractedly brushed away some crumbs that had fallen into the weave of his sweater. In the evenings, when he had to work, Robert loved to munch his way through cookies. "It's about what happened yesterday morning. Are you still fretting over the spilled shopping? Sweetie, you most likely saw a cat jump through the window." The window was shut. I saw a shadow escaping, she protested. Well, perhaps the cat came in through the door with you, moved the cushions and knocked over the shopping, then as you saw it escape, its shadow seemed bigger than it really was. And perhaps the window was not really closed but slightly ajar. Marguerite shook her head. When have there ever been cats in this neighborhood? Mr. Wonko's dog frightens them off, you know it does. I'm telling you that something was wrong. I'm sure of it. Before he could argue the case, she suddenly changed the subject. Have you phoned Odd today? No. I've been very busy today, with that deadline, you know. And Odd's not the type for calls, he only calls us if he needs something. I've tried to reach him twice, but he never answers. He's probably been out skateboarding, maybe wearing his headphones over his ears. Or he's courting some beautiful girls. You know how it is, he is your son after all. This time Marguerite's smile was warm. Hey Mr. Della Robbia, Odd is your son too. Hee hee. Oh, I know it, sweetie, don't I know it? Now you go get some sleep, I'll join you once I'm done here. Night night. Now alone, Robert's concentration returned to the computer, a boring sales report full of calculations that needed to be verified before tomorrow. It would take hours to finish. After a few minutes, the front doorbell rang. Robert Della Robbia sighed in annoyance, it seemed he wasn't going to get any work done this evening. From the bedroom, adjacent to the study, he could already hear Marguerite's light snoring, the fright of the previous day must have really left her exhausted. The doorbell rang again. I'm coming, he muttered. Who could it be at this hour? In his slippers, he went down the darkened staircase, and reached the front door. Yes, he asked. From the other side of the door a male voice answered him, I apologize for disturbing you at this hour, but my truck has broken down and my phone is dead. I need to make a telephone call. Robert opened the door. Standing before him was a tall man, with a thin face and hollowed-out cheeks, shortly cut hair and very penetrating eyes. He was wearing a Macintosh and had the broad shoulders of a leanly built man who could nevertheless call on quite a reserve of strength. What happened to her, pal? Mr. Della Robbia asked kindly. The man sighed, but the expression of relief did not reach his face. She just suddenly stopped, in a massive cloud of smoke. I'd like to call someone to come recover her. Heaven knows, I'm not a great mechanic. Robert looked him in the eye, rather distrustfully. Really? I wouldn't have expected that. Pardon? I don't know, but from your face I'd believe you could build a car from scratch all on your own. The man answered with a forced smile, well, unfortunately, it's not like that. My phone is dead, so I thought I could get help, but the bar on the corner is closed, and so is the gas station. That's normal, Robert confirmed, in a more cordial tone. At night this is a pretty quiet neighborhood. The stranger suddenly looked as if a thought had struck him. Hey, what if you came and had a glance at my car with me? If you know something I don't, we might be able to fix it between us. Not a problem, Robert smiled. I'm not an expert either, but they say two heads are better than one. The stranger had parked right at the bottom of the Della Robbia's driveway. The vehicle was a pickup that looked more than a little lived in, with muddy off-road tires. Robert noticed movement in the passenger compartment and stopped. The snout of a dog had appeared behind the window, blood-stained teeth pressed against the glass as the animal growled. Dogs? But why hadn't Mr. Wonko's barked? It could usually smell other animals up to a kilometer away. Robert began to turn around to ask for an explanation, but something struck him in the back of the head, forcefully, and he passed out. Grigory shouldered the motionless body of Mr. Della Robbia and laid him out in the pickup's cargo bed. Then he opened the door to calm Hannibal and Scipio down. Down, you two, be still, you had enough fun playing with that Wang Cow-Eyes dog. The two beasts obeyed instantly, curling up on the seats so that their snouts rested between their legs. He picked up a small case that was lying on the back seat and from it extracted a soft-cover album of memory cards and a pair of gloves. They were of basic leather make, but entwined around the fingers were plastic wires of various colors, connected to electrodes positioned on the fingertips. On the back of the right hand were mounted a little multicolor display and a power switch. The album, however, contained duplicates of all data he obtained using the machine. It was so precious that Grigory never parted company with it. Nobody knew about the archive's existence, even Hannibal Mago, the magician. The collection of memory cards was his personal insurance policy, his hope of a dignified pension. Grigory picked a blank, virginal memory card and removed it from one of the album's transparent sleeves. He quickly inserted it into a port underneath the glove's display. At that exact moment, Hannibal and Scipio launched themselves out of the car and threw themselves on him, barking and waggling their stumpy tails. They had long ago learned that, when Grigory put on the gloves, something important was about to happen. The album fell to the ground with a dull thud. "Please be alright, please be alright," Grigory hissed hoarsely. Groping around, he hurried to recover the album and several memory cards that had scattered themselves in the fall. Then he breathed deeply to regain his calm and self-control. Mishaps, setbacks, everyone had to deal with little mishaps at times in their lives. And residential neighborhoods like this could be dangerous places. Just when it seemed that everyone was sleeping like angels, just when you let your guard down, all it would take would be for someone, perhaps some old coot on the verge of death anyway, to glance out of his window, see what was happening, and rouse the neighbors. They'd be on any intruder in seconds. Grigory Nictopoulos finally pulled on the gloves and activated them, flipping the switch by pressing it against his chin. He approached Robert's unconscious body and lightly laid his fingertips against the temples of the man's head. The words "memory transfer initiated" flashed on the glove's little display. At that moment, in the spectral villa that Grigory had occupied in the city suburbs, not far from Kadik, his most sophisticated equipment whirred into life. On the computer displays images played showing a child running over a meadow, his fair hair cut short and a carefree expression on his face. The same boy was now in school, wearing a black smock with a blue bow and looking miserable. Next there was a young man in a jacket and tie, his newlywed wife Marguerite beside him in a bridal dress. Both of them looked very young and very much in love. Then Robert on his first day at work, his beard freshly trimmed. Robert waiting anxiously outside the delivery room in a hospital, inside of which his wife was about to give birth to their son, Ott. The images began to speed up, while the computer continued to record everything.
Now we know what that mysterious love was. So, now things are starting to look a little bit more interesting, but a little bit frightening that the warriors had the wrong culprit. But, it seems that things are going a lot more smoother now. Again, I apologize for it being weeks upon weeks of not being able to get this done. I was busy with a whole lot of stuff and I could not, for the life of me, stop doing what I'm doing and just, it was a mess. But now that I'm back into doing this series, hopefully the next episode we can get more answers. And with that, I'm ending today's episode. So comment and like if you enjoyed the series so far and like to see more of it. And I'll see you guys in the next video. See ya.